Hello, Justin.
Howdy. It rained yesterday, well, really today, so
Last night, yeah. How much did you guys get? Farmers always know how much you got.
about an inch.
About an inch. See, you're supposed to say like 96 hundredths or something like that.
Well, it was a little more than an inch.
Okay,
But
a little over an inch. All right.
yeah, and it sort of continued to rain throughout the morning, so we didn't get a whole lot done because we were napping for quite a while, but
You've earned it. That's
catch
all
up
right.
on some sleep.
That's all right.
And the roads were too muddy to go anywhere, so we couldn't
Yeah.
even make it to our combines without walking. So
Well, nobody wants to do that.
then you track mud in the house, and Lindsay
Yeah.
and your mother do not like it. So
I'll take note. Well, all right. Well, let's see. We are in Daniel. Let's see. I got too many things plopped up here. Here we go. All right. I think I'm ready. Daniel chapter 8. We started last week. And, covered a good bit of it. I think we'll finish this week. Maybe even get into chapter 9. So, quick recap of Daniel chapter 8. What two animals were in Daniel's dream vision? A ram and a goat. And which one came up first?
rain.
The ram came up first. And what was interesting about the ram? His horns. One horn was bigger than the other.
He ran like this.
He ran a little lopsided, and he butted his head to the north, south, east, and west, or whichever direction, maybe just three directions. But and then signified what? What did the ram signify?
The Medes and the Persians.
Medes and the Persians. Okay, and we talked about that significance of their reign, and the horns representing the Medes, and the small horn representing the Medes, and the big horn representing the Persians. So then we had the two animals, the ram and the goat. What two kingdoms were represent? We had the Persians, and then what other kingdom? The Grecian kingdom by the goat. So the goat represents Greece. That we should remember that. That's two G's.
Well, yeah.
Okay.
There goes my great. I was gonna have.
You were going to say that?
I was going to
That's
have
why
a really
we missed
good.
it last week.
I was
'cause
going
you
to have
didn't say
a good introduction. I meant to put. You know what a grease zerk is, right?
it. Yeah.
A grease zerk. You know, a zerk is those things you put the grease gun on and you pump to make the grease go in the right place. And the way that I told Lindsay to remember the name of that and what goes in it is because Artaxerxes was the king that overcame Greece. So, anyways.
That's a stretch. All right.
It's
that's not very
Artaxerxes
helpful.
and the king of Greece.
That's less helpful than you. All right.
But
Than some of them you come up with. All right.
well, yeah, but Artaxerxes. Anyways,
All right.
continuing on.
Artaxerxes.
Continue about the unigoat.
The unigoat. Yeah. So this goat had one horn on his head, and it was a significant horn, a prominent horn between his eyes. And who did that represent? Alexander the Great. So that's our first specific king that was represented. And this goat, what was significant about the way he traveled?
Couldn't even touch the ground.
Never touched the ground, which is weird for a goat because most goats touch the ground. So he never touched the ground, signifying the speed with which he went across. And in Daniel's previous vision, that kingdom had been signified by a leopard with wings. So if there's anything faster than a leopard, it's a leopard with
goat.
it's a leopard with wings or a floating goat. Got to be a floating goat to get away from the leopard. Okay, but so both visions so far that we've had concerning Greece have signified the speed with which they would advance, and historically we know that to be true. So, and Alexander the Great was the king. I read just a little blurb or two on him today. His father Philip of Macedon was a conqueror as well. In fact, he was the one that had basically repelled the Persians from Greece and made Greece its own independent nation, so that then after his assassination, Alexander took over at the age of 20, and very shortly then, he led, within just a year or two of becoming king, he began his military conquests and campaigns and took over most of the known world very quickly at that point. So Alexander the Great was our first king that was mentioned. What happened to that big horn, though, that represented Alexander? Well, it got broke off, and it became no more because Alexander died abruptly, and there was no one to take over his kingdom. So what happened to the one horn?
It was quartered,
It
drawn
bec-
and quartered.
It grew into 4 smaller horns, representing the 4 kingdoms. We talked about that. There were specifically the 2 that we care about out of those kingdoms were the Seleucids and the Ptolemies that took over kind of the Israel, and to the east were the Seleucids, and then Ptolemies took over Egypt. And who was the last Ptolemaic ruler? Cleopatra was the last Ptolemaic ruler. So before that, before Rome finally absorbed all of that area. And then who was the second king? Finally, those 4 horns go away, and one little horn grows up and makes a nuisance of himself. And who was that?
Antiochus Epiphanes IV.
Antiochus, however you want to say that, Antiochus Epiphanes IV. And he was a bad guy, and we talked a lot about how bad he was last week. And so all that kind of rolls into, kind of sets the foundation or the groundwork for where we are today in our study today, as we get into some of the interpretation of Daniel chapter 8. So that summarizes chapter 8, verses 1 through 14, the vision that we've had so far. And I think we're ready to jump in and go with the next section. That wasn't too bad for a review for me.
Did you talk about the 2300?
We did. You want to talk about the 2300?
No, I.
You have more to add on that?
No, I didn't have it. I was listening to class last week.
Okay.
And
we did talk about it. Yeah.
I didn't. I must have been on the radio or something at that time. But
no, Chuck wouldn't let me get away from it. Chuck is always asking questions. So yeah, the 2300. We talked about some possible interpretations, whether it was 2300 morning and evening sacrifices. Lisa. 33. He was not very old. He was young, and so I know his conquest. He spent most of that from the time he was about 22 is when he started his conquest, and spent most of that up until his death, just taking over stuff, just conquering things, and then probably would have gone further if he hadn't died or been killed. So, or at least that would have been his plan.
well, Daniel 13 is a special passage of Daniel written to Alexander the Great. It says, "Let no one despise you from your youth." So he went and took over most of the known world.
Daniel 13, huh?
Daniel 13.
I'll let you cover that chapter when we get to it. All right. That's a new one. All right. The 2300, we talked about it. Did that just cut out? 2300 talked about that being, some think maybe 2300 morning and evening sacrifices, to divide that into a half number of days, but that doesn't really fit historically what we talked about. Some think it would be 2300 years. That really doesn't fit anything historically. We don't like that one at all. And so then the other 2 possibilities that we kind of talked about were, it's a symbolic number that stands for a completion of what needs to happen. When it finally happens, then that time is up. And, that's kind of sometimes I feel like that solution for prophetic language is kind of a cop-out, because it's like, well, we don't know what it means, so we'll just say it's symbolic. But sometimes it is symbolic, so we've got to be okay with that. And then the other thing was, the other one was 2300 days. And we can make that work with, from the time that Antiochus begins his reign of terror against the Jews until the time that the sacrifice is restored, comes out to pretty much right on key with being 2300 days. And that's was that 6.5 years, I think, 6 years, 4 months. And that works out pretty well with the timing of Antiochus's reign of terror against the Jews. So, good. I'm glad you brought that up. I did not include that in the review, but we did talk about it last week, so that's good. Okay, so there's the picture. We saw that. We're ready for verses 15 through 19.
When Daniel had seen the vision, I sought to understand it, and behold, standing before me was one who looked like a man. And I heard the voice of a man between the banks of Ulai. And he called out and said, Gabriel, give this man an understanding of the vision. So he came near to where I was standing, and when he came, I was frightened and fell on my face. But he said to me, Son of man, understand that the vision pertains to the time of the end. Now while he was talking with me, I sank into a deep sleep with my face to the ground, but he touched me and made me stand upright. He said, Behold, I'm going to let you know what will occur at the final period of the indignation, for it pertains to the appointed time of the end.
Okay, lots to talk about here. Who does Daniel hear speaking? I'm sorry? Gabriel. Okay. Yes.
You saw a man talking about Gabriel.
Okay, so he kind of, he hears the voice of a man, and that man calls out and says, talks to Gabriel, and have we ever heard that name before?
Never.
Not before this point. If you go back and read everything from Genesis up to this point, first time we hear that name. So do we hear that name ever again? Where do we hear that name again? Mary and Zechariah, when he finds out that his wife is going to have a baby as well, at the same time, around that same time as Mary. So we know who Gabriel is. Gabriel is a messenger. What's another word for messenger? An angel. So Gabriel is an angel sent from God with a message. And so it's just an interesting. I don't know. It's just interesting that we've had other angelic messengers in the past. Perhaps Gabriel was one of those that just never was named, and he was never named before that point. But at this time, he's finally named. Perhaps this is the first time he's ever been sent on an errand. We just don't know. But we know he's going to show up again later. And so, just kind of an interesting connection to make there between those stories. So we have this other voice is unnamed, unidentified. We don't know who this other voice is that Daniel hears speaking. Didn't we hear in his last vision, wasn't there somebody like a voice that called out, or the holy ones, I think it was called, and not really identified as to who those holy ones were that were speaking in that last vision that Daniel had. So it's not uncommon in the examples we've already seen up to this point for Daniel to have conversations or to hear people talking, and those people or beings, whoever they are unidentified. So they're at least on par with one another, or at least he has the authority to direct Gabriel to speak the message that he has been given. And so there's at least a co-messenger role that's being observed here, if not a role of some greater authority to Gabriel. It could be that this man's voice that he hears speaking is not a man at all, or not even an angel, but it could be the Lord. We just don't know. It's not identified, and we're not given any more real information than that. But it's interesting that Daniel sees these things. And it's interesting to me that it's not just like a voice that tells him, but a voice that tells Gabriel to tell him. That it's like, okay, that's an interesting connection, and I'm not sure what to make of that, but it's a neat little detail. So what is Gabriel instructed to do?
Give him understanding of the vision.
Give Daniel an understanding of the vision. Give this man an understanding of the vision. So he, that is Gabriel, came near to where I was standing, and when he came, what was Daniel's reaction? Okay, why? I mean, why? Why do you suppose he was frightened?
Most of the time, this angel has been said it has the appearance of a man. Sometimes angels and the appearance of a man might be very interestingly viewed. But this one is said it has the appearance of the man. But anytime an angelic or heavenly messenger comes, people are frightened of it. It is not something that they are like, oh, that's cool, that's great. It is frightening to be in the presence. Almost not every, but many encounters, they have to tell the people to be do not fear. Why?
Yeah.
Why not fear? Because they have a right, a reason to be afraid of what they're talking to.
Right. So if you go to Luke chapter 1, Luke 1, verse 11, an angel of the Lord appeared next to Zacharias, standing on the right side of the altar of incense. And Zacharias was troubled when he saw him. Not supposed to be anybody in there, first of all. This is like, this is kind of behind the velvet rope kind of thing where you're not supposed to go. So the fact that anybody was in there would be troubling, but then that it's an angel is troubling. So there's that. And then go down to verse 30, and the angel, or 28, the angel comes in and appears, verse 26, identified as Gabriel, and verse 28 coming in says to her, "Hail, favored one, the Lord is with you." But she was greatly troubled at this statement and kept pondering what kind of salutation this might be. The angel said to her, "Do not be afraid." So the angel sensed the fear in Mary that at his appearance and the way that he was addressing her. So I've never seen an angel. I don't know what they look like. I don't know what they, if they just appear as a man, just a regular dude, or if it's like there's something special about their appearance that marks them as an angel so that you recognize them as such when you see them. That seems to be the indication to me that there is something different about their appearance. Even if they appear as a man, there's still something noticeably different about their appearance that sets them apart from what you would expect to see if it was just a man. And that difference, whether it's the fact that they've been in God's presence and they have some semblance of His holiness, as Moses' face radiated God's presence or God's holiness. It could be something like that, or it could be just something about what their appearance is. I don't know. But it's striking, and it's obvious, and it is troubling, and there's a visceral visual reaction that people have when they come face to face with an angel. So there you go.
But I think on the other hand, though, your question is, how does Daniel react? And you might have noticed this many times in math class. Daniel falls on his face, and the message must not be very important because Daniel just dozes off.
I think he faints. I don't know. Maybe that's it.
He's getting an angelic message, and the guy just like, I'm too tired now.
Why did you have to bring math into it? All right.
Well, I just think back to the times when I'm just laying down on my face, which would have been.
I sank into a deep. Yeah, verse 18. He sank into a deep sleep. I think it's more of a trance or something to help him cope with what he is seeing and about to see. And so I think it's Paul, when he talks about his when he was taken up to the third heaven, whether it really happened or whether it happened in a vision or a dream, he wasn't really sure how it happened, but he knew it happened. And so that's kind of the way I picture this with Daniel here. Is Daniel awake? Is he asleep? Is he lucid? Is it happening in his mind, in his subconscious? I'm not sure he knows. But it's real, whatever it is. It's really happening, however it's manifesting itself. So what is Daniel told?
But the vision is for the time of the end.
Oh, boy. Here we go. All right. So the vision is for the time of the end. The end of what?
Well, when he re-talks about it, he says the latter end of the indignation.
Okay. And that is a key point. Because if you just go down the rabbit hole that is Google when you look at like Googling this verse or what was Daniel talking about when he talked about the end, you're going to get a whole bunch of stuff, and a whole bunch of it is going to be hooey. That's a technical math term that means gibberish. Just no good. It's just baloney. And then you're going to get, you guys think I like to speculate? Oh man, people that write about this stuff like to speculate, and they speculate really, really big and really, really hard about stuff. So a good rule to observe when it comes to prophetic stuff in the Bible is simpler is better, and relating things to the immediate context is better than extrapolating it out into things are in no way tied to the immediate context. And so for the people that take this and want to take, because of this one phrase where it talks about the end and want to make it about the end of time or about when the Lord returns, because he's talking about the end and that's the end, right? I mean, it kind of makes sense. It kind of feels like maybe that's a good idea because the end is the end. But if that's not what Daniel was talking about and we take it and apply it to that, then we have done a tremendous disservice to the text, and we've done a really bad job of interpreting the text. So we want Daniel to tell us what the end means, and he tells us. He tells us what the end means. He tells us right there in verse 19. Or Gabriel tells us. Daniel tells us through Gabriel, or however you want to say that. Behold, I'm going to let you know what will occur at the final period of the indignation. We talked about that last week. What was the indignation? We talked about it a little bit, at least.
God's anger, his punishment for the Jewish people.
Okay, so what was the big thing that happened? And we counted in the 2,300 days, and there was something really bad going on during that time. Yeah, the defiling of the temple. And remember that Antiochus Epiphanes not only did launch this reign of terror against the Jews, but he also enticed some of the Jews into joining him. And so some Jews went along with what he was doing. And so the indignation is not the indignation of the people. It's not even the indignation of the temple itself. It's the indignation of God. God is the one who is indignant. God is the one who has been offended. God is the one who is being challenged by Antiochus Epiphanes as he sets himself up and calls himself the Lord of hosts and calls himself God and tries to get the people to abandon the God that they have known and worship him. And some people go along with it to the point of celebrating the fact that he does really bad things like erecting an altar of Zeus and sacrificing a pig to it in the temple. And there were Jews that celebrated that. And so this is God's indignation that is being remedied here in this vision, not the indignation of the people. And so Daniel pinpoints for us what's taking place. And we know that the 2,300 days has already been talked about, that there was going to be a period of time when that indignation from the start of Antiochus's reign of terror to the end of that, and we even read from, it was the first time ever in this building where we read from the Apocrypha. We read from Maccabees in Bible class last week, and we looked at that historical account of what Antiochus did. And from the time that Antiochus started until the Maccabean revolt ended that reign of terror and reestablished the proper worship at the temple and the proper sacrifice at the temple was about 2,300 days. Lisa. Maccabee, Antiochus. A-N-T-I, Uchus. O-C-H-U-S, I think. A-N-T-I-O-C-H-U-S. Antiochus Epiphanes. And that was a self-proclaimed title. I read today, Epiphanes. I just blanked on it. I read he gave himself that name, and behind his back, people called him Antiochus Epimanes or something like that, which means the crazy one. He was calling himself the glorified one or something like that, and people behind his back were calling him the crazy one.
It's like the word epiphany in English.
Epiphany, yeah, is that?
So he was, I am the great, mysterious wisdom feller.
Right. So he is so he that was his self-proclaimed title.
And he was, I had to, for one of my intertestamental period classes, I had to memorize all of the kings of the Ptolemies and the Seleucids as they were fighting. And it was like Ptolemy 1, 2, Antiochus, Ptolemy 3, 4, Antiochus II, Antiochus, and then Darius the first, and then Darius the first was Epiphanes' father or something like that. It's very convoluted. He's the fourth Antiochus, or that's the way I say his name, Antiochus. He's the fourth Antiochus, and he just gave himself the title Epiphanes.
And it was kind of like how many? There are 5 Herods in the New Testament, so it's almost like those names became titles. They, you know, and so we've got several Dariuses, we've got several, you know, how many pharaohs were there? Lots of them. That was a title. There's several Abimelechs. There are several Herods and Jameses, and some of those became titles rather than names. So here's just one case. Let's see, Daniel is told until the period of the indignation is complete. So this prophecy applies to two kingdoms, right? Daniel saw two animals that represent two kingdoms. The small horn that rose at the end of the vision was a special moment in time that related to that second kingdom of the vision. And to take that little horn and then to try to extrapolate that out to be something that's thousands of years in the future that has nothing to do with that part of the vision, it's a tremendous stretch, and it does no good to the text at all. It is not a faithful treatment of the text. And so those that try to make this some prophecy regarding the end of time are completely missing the point of what Daniel's vision is. Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's exactly right. We put it in the context of what the vision is about. And if there's a reason for us to interpret something with some kind of a double fulfillment or a future understanding about what that text means, then we let the Bible do that for us through the way it uses the text in some future reference, and it never does that with this text. Daniel is never used later on in the Bible to try to give us information about the end of time. Daniel's prophecies stand alone about the things that they pertain to with the kingdoms that he was seeing visions about. And so that's a faithful treatment of the text. It's not putting information in there that was never intended to be there. Okay, so I think that gets us there. The other one little blurb, we had a vision, our last vision with Daniel. We had some animals, and that fourth beast that came up was a beast it was great and terrible, and it had claws and jaws, and what it couldn't stomp, it chomped, and then 10 horns came up on it, right? And what happened to those 10 horns?
One came up.
They fell off and one replaced them, right? One little horn came up. So now we've got two visions that have little horns. Are those the same little horns?
Probably not.
Did they apply to the same kingdoms? What was the ferocious beast with the 10 horns? What kingdom did that represent? Rome. And what kingdom does this beast represent? Greece. Okay? It's not the same kingdom. Can't be the same horn. So just because we have one vision with a little horn and another vision with a little horn doesn't mean those two little horns are the same thing. Yeah, and people try to make that case as well. The ones that want this prophecy in Daniel chapter 8 to relate to the end of time want to associate those two horns together and say they're the same thing. And that it doesn't work. They're not. They're not applied to the same kingdoms. So there we go. All right, ready to move on? Have I confused you all yet? Just wait. Lisa. No, that's not what I said. The prophecies of Daniel that we're looking at right now are not used later to signify end of time events. Okay, so yes, Daniel is referenced in the New Testament, but not as though his prophecies have to do with the coming of Christ or the second coming of Christ.
Because that's one of the things that scholars will do is they'll say, well, the New Testament reuses some of the prophecies to reference for Jesus and for the destruction of the temple that have been prophesied and fulfilled in their own book in the past. And so they'll say, well, since it happened in, this one passage in Ezekiel is meant to be about the living water, that was the Spirit coming on the people there, and there's something about the Spirit and the living water coming from the throne in Revelation, we should be able to apply that to any prophecy of Scripture of the Old Testament and say, well, the two horns here, because the living water is here, here, and here, the horns are here, here, and here, and we can start throwing out whatever double interpretation. They would say, well, you've interpreted it in its own time. Well, I can just say I interpret it in my time too, because there are other prophecies that sort of do the same thing. And so these prophecies are not reinstated in some form in the New Testament to say, well, the two horns actually represented John the Baptist and Jesus, and Jesus was the bigger horn, and after him comes something. There are times when prophecies will do that, and that double fulfillment is something that people will try to read back into prophecies that we would say they've been fulfilled. In the Medes and the Persians in Greece, this prophecy's done with. And they'd come back and say, well, but really we can re-pick all this to pieces and have a new interpretation of it because double prophecy exists. But that never happens to the prophecies of this passage is in Daniel.
So, and when that happens, we let the Bible do that for us. We don't come up with those on our own and say, well, we're going to find multiple interpretations of this prophecy all through history. That's not the way we're supposed to use prophecy. Okay, good point. Verses 20 to 22.
The ram which you saw with the two horns represents the kings of Media and Persia. The shaggy goat represents the kingdom of Greece, and the large horn that is between his eyes is the first king. The broken horn and the four horns that arose in its place represent four kingdoms which will arise from his nation, although not with his power.
Okay, so last week as we kind of read through the vision, as we talked about the vision, we talked about the interpretation as well, and now we're kind of reading what the angel Gabriel is saying is the interpretation, and so a lot of that stuff is stuff that we already talked about last week. But here's the angel saying, "Hey, what y'all talked about last week was true. You guys did a good job." So we've kind of already answered these questions in the previous lesson as we talked about the vision itself. But just a quick recap is okay. So what is Daniel told regarding the ram and the goat?
It's the kings we talked about.
It's just the stuff we just talked about. It's two kingdoms. It's the Medes and the Persians, and then it's the Greeks. And so that's the angel telling Daniel, identifying for Daniel in the year 540, what's going to happen. Now, some of this has already started because you already have the Medes and the Persians kind of gearing up and getting ready, but the Greeks don't happen until like 100 years later or something. So it's like 330, I think, that is Alexander the Great. So 200 years later is when the Greeks come along. And so here we have Daniel writing and Gabriel identifying for Daniel 200 years in advance the name of the kingdom that really isn't even a kingdom yet, that is just kind of their Greek philosophy and Greek culture is just starting to get going. Nobody is picking out Greece at this point in history and saying that's the next big one. Nobody's doing that. But Gabriel is, and Daniel's got it figured out. This passage, this verse right here, is one of the primary reasons that modern day biblical scholars want to date the book of Daniel at about 150 BC instead of dating it all the way back when it actually occurred in the mid 500s is when he lived.
Because God can't be that right, can he?
Yeah, because predictive prophecy can't be that accurate that far in advance, and they don't believe in the miraculous. So, and it's, we can't let them convince us that that's the truth. We can't let them take the veracity or the truth of Daniel away from us like that. So what is he told regarding the horns? Just the stuff we've talked about, that they represent specific kings. It kind of shifts back and forth, doesn't it? The big horn represents a king, and then the four medium-sized horns represent kingdoms, and then the little horn represents a king. And so we have kind of different wavelengths that we look at those horns as being whether they're specific people or the kingdoms that are under specific kings' rule. So he's told those things regarding the horns, though. All right, let's finish out here 23 to 27.
latter periods of their rule, when the transgressors have run their course, a king will arise insolent and skilled in intrigue. His power will be mighty, but not by his own power. He will destroy to an extraordinary degree and prosper and perform his will.
Let me pick up the bottom verse of 24 there. And to anoint, I'm in chapter 9. No wonder that didn't make sense. 24, he will destroy to an extraordinary degree and prosper. He will destroy mighty men and holy people. Sorry about that.
And through his shrewdness, he will cause deceit to succeed by his influence. He will magnify himself in his heart, and he will destroy many while they are at ease. He will even oppose the prince of princes, but he will be broken without human agency. The vision of the evenings and the mornings, which has been told, is true, but keep the vision secret, for it pertains to many days in the future. Then I, Daniel, was exhausted and sick for days. Then I got up again and carried on the king's business, but I was astounded at the vision, and there was none to explain it.
Okay, so some interesting questions arise here at the conclusion of the reading, I think. First of all, what does Gabriel reveal about the little horn? Kind of, again, we've talked about this a lot. We spent a lot of time last week and already this week talking about Antiochus Epiphanes and his characteristics and qualities that make him the obvious candidate for who that little horn represents. He fits historically. He fits in the timeline. He fits in the character. He just fits as the person that this little horn represents. And so that's who that has to be. So then what is Daniel told to do with the information he has received?
Keep it, yeah.
Okay, you ready for this? I don't say things like this very often, but New American Standard gets it wrong here. And I only know that because Denny Petrillo told me in his commentary. So it's not properly translated. He doesn't say keep it secret. He says keep it sealed. And there's a difference, okay? Keeping something secret means keeping it on the down low, right? Keeping it hush-hush. But keeping it sealed means protect it. Protect it and don't let it vanish. Don't let it be manipulated. Don't let it be misused. Don't let it be forgotten. And so if Daniel was supposed to keep it secret, the fact that you and I are talking about it means he didn't do a very good job of that, right? But if he was supposed to seal it, if he was supposed to protect it, the fact that we're talking about it today means Daniel did his job. Daniel did exactly what he was supposed to do. He protected the message. Chuck.
But on the other hand, talking about the secret, keep it secret. Daniel's not going to tell anybody about it, but it's revealed later on to it's revealed later on. And that's what, that would make us, well, anyway.
Yeah.
It just makes sense that, telling Daniel to keep it secret because it wasn't supposed to get out yet. But it was going to be revealed later on in other ways.
Yeah.
By other prophets.
And there is some truth to that, and there are places I think where we can read of similar things that even Jesus would tell his disciples sometimes, hey, don't tell people what you saw happen here because I'm not ready for the word to get out yet. And so we know that there are occasions when God does want to keep things from going too far too fast. But this occasion, this word is, I think, he makes the case that the New American Standard mistranslates the word that is being used in the original language, that the word itself should be sealed and not secret. And so I wouldn't, I'm not going to run anybody off if you like the word secret there, but I think it has a better connotation for what Daniel is asked to do with the information than to saying to keep it secret. Scott?
Yeah, he was told to seal it up because it's many days down the road, as you said.
Yeah.
I mean, it's probably 400 years before Antioch is
Right.
the end of it now.
Right.
Whereas if you look at comparisons to Revelation, there's a lot of connections to where John is told, don't seal it up.
Yeah.
Because this is the time, it's now. It's
Yeah.
happening. He writes it is happening.
Right.
So you can say, you can seal it, it's down the road.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Daniel's the author of this, right? So he's writing these things down.
Yeah,
These are
right. Yeah, and so he does. He is faithful with the information and keep the idea of protecting it, keeping it sealed versus keeping a secret doesn't mean he went and told the whole population the next day, hey, you're not going to believe what I saw. Doesn't mean that he went out and started just broadcasting it, but he was prepared to protect that information so that it could be disseminated down through the ages, to the time when it would be recognized as this is what we've been told was going to happen. So how does the vision affect Daniel?
He was sick for.
It goes back to, I think part of it is just that physical reaction that he has to the whole thing anyway. From the very beginning, he's scared and troubled by the fact that he's seeing an angel, by the fact that he's having this vision. Just the whole ordeal that he goes through, I think, is physically taxing on him. Daniel is no longer a young man. He's an older fella now, and I think just going through something that is emotionally and physically exhausting and troubling has a greater effect on you as you get older. I'm told. I don't know this for sure, but that's that's part of it. But what about the vision itself is likely to have caused Daniel trouble, or had given him a physical reaction? Don.
Being in the presence of God and the others that are around God.
Yeah.
You made a point to talk about how Moses was
Yeah.
shined or
Right.
was bright.
Yep.
Put a veil on. You can imagine just that alone, let alone learning what's getting ready to happen. And that's something that I think God has maybe kept secret or kept it sealed up for one reason, because we can't handle it.
Yeah.
And then the other reason is to give us some hope.
There you go. Okay, so and I think that's a good point. We've all had dreams, and we've all had dreams probably that I had one last week that was just weird, and it woke me up, and I couldn't go back to sleep, and it was nothing. I'm not saying it was just a weird dream, and so I was tired the next day because I couldn't sleep after I had a weird dream. So there's some aspect of that to a degree here. But it's beyond that. It's more than that. The experience he's been through is actually physically exhausting. Lisa.
Well, that as well as what he's been told is rather upsetting. It's one of the
Yeah.
that are coming to the people. And also, at the very last sentence, he says, I was astonished by the vision, but no one understood it. So that sounds to me like he did discuss it perhaps with some other people, which would lend to the sealing up.
Yeah. I think you've nailed it. It's a burden to be given this kind of information. To know, think about the other prophets. If you've ever read the short little book of Habakkuk, Habakkuk sees a vision, and it's about the destruction of Jerusalem, about the destruction of his people. And at one point in the book, he says, "There's nothing I can do but sit back and wait for the destruction of my people." What kind of burden is that for a person to have to bear, to know that terrible things are coming for your people, and there's nothing you can do to stop it? And Daniel has been shown a vision about some really horrible things that are about to happen to his people. Even though it's hundreds of years in the future, it's a burden to know that, and he can't stop it. He can't undo it. He can't do anything to make it better. And so, he's really troubled by that. He's going to lose sleep over this. He's going to be sickened by this. And so it's just the burden of the truth that he has been told. And it hurts, and he can't fix it. Chuck, do you have something you wanted to add?
But just kind of, as a side note, Daniel
Yeah,
And I want to reference that back to, this is in the third year of Belshazzar.
yeah,
So he's carrying on the king's business, but yet, in chapter 5 there, when they had, when they done the handwriting on the wall, he didn't apparently know about Daniel,
yeah,
but Daniel was being carried on the king's business.
yeah.
And just a side note,
That is an interesting point. Daniel is faithfully discharging his duties, even though the king doesn't know who he is. And so he is doing, and he considers his service, even though evidently he's never been in before the king up to this point, because Belshazzar doesn't know who he is later. But Daniel considers whatever job he's been giving as being service to the king. So even though he doesn't answer to the king, he doesn't go to an audience with the king, he doesn't come before the king, whatever I do is the king's business. And there, I think there's a good little sermon illustration there for us. Whatever your hand finds to do it with your might. Whatever you do in word and deed, do all in the name of the Lord. There's a couple of biblical principles there for us that whatever we do is in the king's service. So I like that point. How do you feel about Daniel saying there at the end, I was astounded at the vision and there was none to explain it?
I think this is a little bit different than as you enter into this period, this portion of the book of Daniel, up until now, well, maybe chapter 7 includes this, but up until now, Daniel's been the one that understands the visions. The dream of Nebuchadnezzar, he understands that. The dream of, the golden statue dream, the dream of him and the giant tree, he understands it. All these different things he understands and can interpret, the handwriting on the wall, and this vision, he doesn't understand. And so, there's a little bit of a different flip in this section of the book of Daniel where there are things he doesn't necessarily get.
So what questions we've read the vision, we've talked about it now for 2 weeks total. We've read through Gabriel's interpretation of the dream. What questions does Daniel still have that Gabriel didn't answer?
I would sit there and go, I want more details.
Okay.
I want more details.
Yeah.
I want get down to the nitty gritty.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
he explains some things, but it's like, come on, there's got to be more to it here.
Give me some dates, give me some indications, give me some locations, give me some names to help me understand what's going on here. Greg.
And I'm not sure which translation will better, but the NIV talks about being all by the vision is beyond understanding. These are God's people. And most of them, like you're saying, very difficult for him. And you think in terms of God's people, continuing to go through even worse things than they've been through. It would be really hard for him to understand.
Yeah.
That's one possibility.
Yeah.
Just to back up a little bit, does New American Standard in verse 25 say, take a stand against the prince of princes?
Okay, he will even oppose the Prince of Princes or take a stand against. And so, yeah.
There are some that want to say this is Rome, not Epiphany.
Right. And they pull that out because if this is Antiochus Epiphanes, that's like 170 years before Christ was born. And so Prince of Princes has to be Jesus, doesn't it? Maybe. And so it could be and they would take that to want it to be this can't be Antiochus because he's not there when Jesus is born. So I'm going to have to get back to you on that. That's a good question. Who that would be or how that would be interpreted. I don't have anything in my notes on that, and I don't recall. Yeah.
It's a good case that it applies to, Epiphanies or the guy.
Yeah.
Except then I have trouble
With with that statement, yep, I'll have to, that's a good place to start next week.
Well, it'd be kind of difficult, I think, to jump, as we were talking about, with this horn and not the same one as the beast horn, because technically, Alexander's kingdom is broken up into different kingdoms, and so the way you define what the kingdom is and how it shifts from one animal, from one horn section to the next, is difficult. But I mean, this is specifically talking about Greece, and Rome is not a part of Greece, and so making the transition from this horn, the little horn, or the one that comes up on the head of the goat, from amidst of these things, there would have to be some sort of prophetic jump from, well, this is now a new nation, a new kingdom, to make it about Rome, and someone in Rome, unless they were trying to make that like Herod is the king that's going to stand up against them. But then I don't know if Herod kind of goes along with this. That would be my only hurdle the other way, is if this is about Rome, how do you switch from, we're talking about the goat with its horn and now it has 4 horns, to, well, the other little horn that comes next is now a part of the Roman nation, the next kingdom that comes to pass.
Yeah. So, and it's a fair question, and it's one that I wasn't prepared for. So we'll have to get back to that. I will search and research. Anything else?
Well, it's my little blue lines up there
There
that
you
I
go.
put. How did this vision affect Daniel? In some ways, is what I put. It doesn't. And I was, you guys were making my point earlier, and that's why I was that what Daniel does is he is overcome. He's laying sick for some days, but then he raises up and goes about the king's business.
Mm-hmm.
And as you were saying, it's a great sermon point, because I was going to try to make that point. But the way I would have framed it would have been that prophecies are great, and sometimes we either have a love or a hate relationship sometimes, or a avoid or really dig in attitude toward prophecy. If it's either, well, I don't really want to read this, it's kind of hard to understand, then it's best if I just not necessarily ignore it, but I don't do anything with it. Or jump in and say, I want to know every single detail and figure out everything that's going on here. But to Daniel, prophecy was something, yes, be concerned, be troubling, and mull over it, but go about the king's business. And so even for our lives, no matter what's troubling us with what Scripture is saying, go about the king's business. We may not have all the answers for some of the things that are going on, but go about the king's business. And obviously it's not the king Darius, but go about Jesus. Go about God, our King. Go about His business every day, in spite of the confusion, in spite of the ways we do not understand, in spite of the ways that we're appalled at different things. Go ahead and go about the King's business. As James would say, it's more important to be living the Word, loving people, than to know all the little doctoral theses that deal with this passage or the other.
And I think too, to consider the burden that Daniel felt at being told just this. I mean, this is, in the grand scheme of everything that's going to happen, this is a blip. This is a little bit that Daniel is being given an insight to, and look at the reaction that he has to it. Look at the difficulty that he has with it. If he were to be told more, or to be given a bigger slice of information about what the future is going to hold, that would have been an even bigger burden. And I think about, it's either 1st or 2nd Thessalonians where Paul tells the people, look, some of y'all are just sitting back waiting for the Lord to return, because that's going to happen in the future, and you're not taking care of yourselves. You're not working, you're not feeding yourselves, you're not taking care of one another. You're just sitting there waiting for the Lord to return. That's not okay. There's still work to be done. And so, when we would I love to know the day the Lord's coming back? If I was given the choice of knowing or not knowing, I'd probably say, yeah, tell me when, so that I could know. But He doesn't tell us that for a reason. And when we think about how much God does know, based on what we've seen here, the fact that He doesn't tell us more means He's really, really smart. Because to tell us more would be not good. It would not be good for us. It would not be good for His purposes of putting us to the work that He wants us to do. And so, the little bit that God does tell us in advance is enough for us to know His omnipotence, His omniscience, His sovereignty, His power. But to then sit back and lament that He doesn't tell us more is to miss the point of why He does tell us what He does. So, Daniel carried this burden, and it affected him. John, you know, when he saw the visions that he saw, it was a burden that he had to deal with. So we need to remember that. Greg.
This does to me though, it's such faith building
Absolutely.
thing to see that God is in control, that we can see that the Bible confirms itself as being true, because these things are documented to you way before they happen.
Right.
So for us, I think it's just like the Revelation, it's meant to be faith building, to say that we won the victory already, we can trust the promises
Right.
come true.
Yeah. Exactly right. As God is proven to be correct and right about what he does reveal to us, it shows that we can trust him to be right about other things as well. And he is faithful and trustworthy in those things. Okay, chapter 9 next week.